we're finally pulling this project back out to continue working on this thing and finally do the couple things we need to do to try to get it to work a little bit better. So, a couple things we need to do in this video is, one, we need to install the sway bar that I bought for this thing. We need to figure out how to install it and where to install it, just to try to get rid of the body roll that this thing has as it's going around corners. We also need to play around with the engine, try to figure out why it's not really running the best, as well as hook up something on the radiator so therefore it doesn't dump coolant everywhere as I'm driving this thing. Also need to move the steering wheel forward. We need to install the seat belt that I bought for this thing finally, and also play around with the brakes, hook up the rear brake caliper, and probably a couple other things here and there to try and get this thing ready to take it for its first actual test drive off-road somewhere. So first thing let's work on is let's move the steering wheel forward. Right now it's like feels like it's in your chest, feels like you're driving like this, so let's move it forward like 5 or 6 inches, so therefore it's a lot more comfortable to drive. So it used to be right here. This is where it used to be. Now it's up here. It's still not really that far from, I mean, on the VF1000 I can lock my elbows while sitting in the seat. This is how far forward the steering wheel is in the VF1000. So it's a little bit better than what it used to be. I was only able to move it forward about 3 inches. I also moved it up a little bit, like 1.5 inches or maybe 2 inches, 1.75 inches. And it's a lot better than what it used to be, but it's still not really perfect. It used to be like right here, which made you feel like you're driving it like this, especially the pedals right here. You know, you're driving this thing like that. So, you know, it's finally better, but it's still not really perfect. I kind of wish I made it forward a little bit more, but if I wanted to move up more, I'd have to remake this tube right here, I'd have to remake this, and I'd have to move this grounding location somewhere else. So I think this is good, it's fine, let's leave it how it is. So also I reinstalled all the switches that actually do something. The reason I put so many switches on this thing is because, you know, most of them do something. You know, turn on the engine, turn on the fan, headlight, light bar. This one turns on the winch. And there's only 4 locations for switches that are not hooked up yet. And The reason I put so many switches on this thing is because I want to have extra in case I want to add stuff later to this thing, like power steering or reverse lights, brake lights, underglow, or whatever I want to add to this thing. I want to have availability of switches to be able to turn that stuff on and off. So, the next thing let's work on is let's install the seat belt. I bought this thing quite a while ago, and let's finally install it. I wanted to make sure to get one that was easy to unhook and to hook it up, just because I've bought seat belts in the past and they're just, you know, complicated. There's straps everywhere. It takes a couple seconds to 30 seconds to like strap yourself in. And it's just kind of annoying, especially when you have to jump in and out every time to grab the camera. So I wanted to make sure to get one that looks easy to hook and unhook. So this thing also looks pretty comfortable with the extra padding right here. So let's figure out a way to install this onto the frame. Alright, let's see how comfortable it is and how easy it is to hook up. Simple. Boom. Boom. Done. It's pretty comfortable. It's already like perfect right now. Pretty comfortable. Definitely not going anywhere. And it is super easy to unhook, done, and then hop out. So. Okay, so next thing is let's start working on installing the sway bar that I bought for this thing. Now, this is actually a sway bar off of a Polaris Razor 1000, and I'm hoping I can get it to work with this very complicated setup. Now, I want to make it to where we can bolt this thing on and off to whenever we need to, because I mainly built this thing for like trails and woods and mainly off-roading. And we really don't want a sway bar when we're going off-roading. That's when we need more suspension flex. But when we're racing this thing or driving this thing like in an open field, or when we need to go fast around corners, is when we need a sway bar. So I kind of want to make this thing like optional to where we can install it within 5 or 10 minutes whenever we need to, and then uninstall it whenever we need to when we're taking this thing off-roading. So it's going to be a little tricky, trying to figure out how to get this thing to work, as well as making it accessible enough to where we can unbolt it easily. So, but I think I can make it work. Now, before we install this thing, I want to do a test with the suspension. I want to see how much flex the suspension has before and after we install this thing. I'm going to lift up the right front tire off the ground until the rear right tire lifts off the ground, and we're going to measure before and after to see how well this thing works. Left in the front. Wow. Let's see what it is. It is 22 inches off the ground, which honestly I kind of thought it was going to be a lot more, but yeah, I mean the rear end still has a lot more flex that it can do, but the other front tire's starting to lift off the ground. So right now this is as much as it can go. If the front end was heavier, I'm pretty sure it could go a little bit more, but you know, it's not terrible. It's not bad, I guess. They need to move it further in that direction. That looks good. Okay, so we got the sway bar installed. This was pretty much the only place I could figure out where to put it, where it would work through all the suspension travel. And having it on the bottom makes it super easy to unbolt this thing and bolt it back on. It's basically just 6 bolts, and this thing just drops off. And then 6 bolts to put it back on, so it shouldn't be too hard to take this thing off whenever we need to. Now, I'm going to do the same suspension flex test and lift up one of the front tires and see how much the suspension flexes to see if this does anything. Alright, the other front tire is now off the ground. So remember, the first time, this was 22 inches off the ground. Now, it is 17. So it did do something. 2, 3, 4, 5. A whole 5 inches less flex in this thing. So at least it did something, I guess. Something. So pretty much the only way we can truly test to see if the sway bar actually helped is by taking this thing for yet another test drive, which we can't do that in this video, so we're just gonna assume that it helped, assume that, you know, it does something. I could notice a difference between like the first and after pictures I took with the sway bar and without the sway bar. With the sway bar, the entire frame wasn't leaning as much as it was without the sway bar. So I think it does help. I'm just not really sure how much we're gonna notice it when we're actually driving this thing. But we can't test it right now, so let's just assume that it works and move on with something else. Let's actually move on to working on installing the coolant overflow tank for the radiator. I bought this on Amazon a couple days ago, and it's pretty much just gonna go right there. I have a mount that I'm going to be welding to here, so therefore we can mount this to here and then hook it up to the radiator so this thing doesn't just dump coolant all over the hot exhaust as I'm driving this thing. So I do realize that, you know, doing this kind of stuff, you know, hooking up seat belts and coolant overflow tanks, it's not the most interesting stuff that I could be doing with this vehicle, but it does have to be done. And then once all the boring stuff is finished, then we can finally take this thing for its first true real off-road test. But first, we gotta do the boring stuff. Okay, so let's start working on fixing the brakes on this project. For some reason, I've been having like a really hard time trying to get the brakes to work properly on this project. The original setup was a single barrel master cylinder that ran to both brake calipers on the front. And for some reason, it just wouldn't really work properly. I bled the system, but I don't think I bled it properly, because it just felt like it wasn't building pressure, and at the time I thought that it was simply just not enough fluid movement to operate both brake calipers. So at the time I replaced it with this double barrel master cylinder, and the way I hooked it up is this barrel on this side operates that brake caliper, then this barrel on the other side operates the other brake caliper. And this time I bled the brakes a lot better. I think I did a proper job this time of bleeding the brakes, because now it's building pressure and holding pressure finally, but now the brake pedal is super hard to push in to get the brakes to work properly. So what I'm gonna do, because we have to hook up the rear brakes, I'm gonna leave the double barrel master cylinder on here, and I'm gonna hook up this brake line to this right here. That way it'll make it to where this barrel on this side will operate the front brakes, and then this barrel on this side will go to the rear brake caliper operating the rear brakes. So that's going to make it to where it's actually the original way that these double barrel master cylinders are. That's the way that they are supposed to be hooked up. So lately I've been having a lot of success bleeding brakes this way. That way gravity is assisting. Basically you just open up the bleeder valve and it just starts, the brake fluid just starts coming down the line. Couple tips is once fluid's starting to come out the bleeder valve, take your caliper and have the bleeder valve at the highest point and then start moving it around this way. That gets extra air bubbles out of the brake caliper. Also, make sure your master cylinder is level. That is very important because if your master cylinder is not level, that can trap air bubbles in the master cylinder. Okay, so the brakes are finished. Let's move on to working on the engine. Now, the reason I'm saying that I want to work on the engine is because the last test drive we did of this project, the first 20 minutes of the test drive, you could really hear that the engine was not running that well. It was like sputtering in the higher RPMs, and it really wasn't that responsive on the throttle when within like the first 20 minutes of driving this thing. But like the more we drove it, the better it was running. By the end of that test drive, it was running way better and it was really responsive on the throttle. It was getting up in the higher RPMs really easily. So what I think it was simply is because this engine has been sitting for over a year and it could possibly be just a couple injectors were clogged a little bit, making it to where it just didn't really want to run that well. But once we were running it really hard, it cleaned up those injectors and then it started running a lot better. But I still have been wanting to do a compression test just to kind of make sure everything's good and there's nothing wrong with it. So this morning, I didn't film it, but this morning I did a compression test on all the cylinders and they're all good. They're all above 180 psi, which is good. I ran the engine for a little bit. I checked the temperature of all the headers and they're all good. They're all the same temperature. So it's running a lot better now. So I think it was just simply this engine's been sitting a while and needed to be run a little bit, and whatever gunk was in the injectors or whatever it was just needed to be cleaned out and run through. So, and I'll also be putting some sea foam in the gas tank next time we take this thing off-roading, just to kind of help it clean out whatever else it could be clogged up or whatever. Now, because I know you guys have been saying, I've been seeing a lot of comments of you guys saying that it sounds like it's running on only 3 cylinders, which I'll admit, this engine definitely does not sound like a normal CBR 1000, but the reason for that is because of the way I have the headers and mufflers set up. On a normal CBR 1000, it is 4 ports into 1 muffler. With this, it's 2 ports into 1 muffler, the other 2 ports into the other muffler, so that way it makes this thing sound like it's a V-twin running. On a normal CBR 1000, it is a steady, constant noise coming out of the muffler. With this, it's more back and forth because of the way the headers and mufflers are set up. So I'll admit, it definitely sounds different, and I think that's why people think it's not running that well and not running on all cylinders, is because of the way I have the headers set up. So, okay, so before I end this video, I want to do one more thing. I want to add some Automotive shock absorbers to the rear suspension to try and get the rear suspension to work a little bit better. Because if you actually look closely at the video of when I jump this thing, you can see just how fast the rear suspension just moves up and down. And you really don't want that when you're jumping. You want it to like move slowly, and you don't want it to bounce when you land. And this thing kind of did that. It just, as soon as the rear suspension hit the jump, you can just see it kind of launch the rear end just in the air. So hopefully adding these will solve that problem. Now, when I ordered these King coilovers, I remember asking for just standard valving, whatever that is, because they asked me like, oh, what valving do you want? And I'm just like, oh, just standard. I get just stock valving, and I'm pretty sure I could change the valving on these shocks, but that sounds complicated and I don't really want to do that. So let's just add these to the rear suspension and see if these will solve the issue of the rear suspension. Now, I do have 2 of these. I have no idea what they're off of, and I don't think I can use these because the second one that I have has a hole on the bottom side, so it just leaks oil everywhere, so I probably need to buy new ones. I'm probably just going to bring this thing to AutoZone and have them, because there's numbers on here, maybe they can look up what these are off of, and hopefully they're not too expensive. Alright, so this is before the shock absorbers. And you get to see how fast it moves up and down. Alright, so this is after the shock absorbers. Ooh, that's... Wow, that's different. Ooh. Yeah, that's a pretty big difference right there. Okay, so these, you can definitely notice a difference. With these installed, the rear suspension was up and down a lot slower now, which is what we want. But now, it's a little hard to test, just in here, just trying to move it up and down myself. So the real test is going to be taking off-road and seeing what it can do. And this vehicle is now finally ready to take it for its first actual off-roading test. I know the first 2 tests we did were more just kind of like testing. It was kind of like a gentle test, just testing it moves, it works, it shifts through the gears and everything. And this thing's now finally ready to take it for its first actual off-roading test. Now, what I may do with these is I may add a couple more mounting locations on the bottom, so therefore we can adjust how much dampening these add to to the suspension, but I'll do that later. Also, I did make sure that these have enough travel, so therefore they can travel all the way up and down with the suspension travel, and they do. They have like this. I think these have like 12 inches of travel on these things. In case you guys are wondering what these are off of, I think he said they're off of like an F250. I forget what year it was, but these were like $64 each. So a little pricey, but hopefully they're worth it. Hopefully these make it to where this thing jumps a lot better and doesn't just pitch up the back end every time we try and jump this thing. So this vehicle is now finally ready to take it for its first actual off-road test, and I'm not really sure when we're gonna get to that. Hopefully soon, and I'm also not sure where we're going to take it. I either want to take it to either Dome Mountain or Brown Mountain. I know that Brown Mountain is a lot more intense than Dome Mountain, so I may want to take it to Dome Mountain first to see if it'll survive there, and if it survives Dome Mountain, then we can take it to Brown Mountain and ride it a lot harder and see if it'll survive there. And if it survives those two tests, and it doesn't need any modification, nothing breaks, nothing catastrophically fails, then this vehicle is finally ready to paint. And I have already decided on the color. I have decided on the main chassis. I'm going to paint the main chassis matte black, or either gloss black, either one of those, and then everything else, all the parts that can be bolted off, like the A-arms, the swing arms, everything else, I'm going to be painting neon green. I think that would look pretty awesome with this vehicle. Black and the neon green with the blue shocks. I think that would look pretty awesome. So anyway, next video of this project is hopefully soon. I'm not sure when we're going to get to it, but it's going to be finally taking this thing off-road. So anyway, I gotta end this video here. Thank y'all for watching. I'll see ya in the next video.